Hi, I am Brent Feldman, and I am your host of Mix and Matchbox. Today, we are joined by the CMO and partner at Search Tides, Greg Brooks. Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
Brent, how are you? I'm having a nice day. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, definitely happy to have you on. Well,
Thanks for
cool.
having me.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to jumping in here, and I'll start with the first question on the list that I got, which is if someone made a tool that leveraged AI to grab all of the search query data, did like competitor analysis, scanned your site, provided all the content, the markup and updates, and where it should go, where do SEOs stand in adding value at that point where AI could maybe just literally do everything?
Yeah, wow, what a great question to kick it off with. Let's get existential right away. So
Cool.
I'll actually give you a little bit of context because I think that we just might happen to be at Search Tides, and for those who have the 99.9% of people who have never heard about Search Tides at this moment, we're basically a hub for all things SEO and what we're calling AIO, so AI optimization as well. And in terms of traditional SEO, we're actually part of groups that have scraped and crawled tens of millions of pages of search results, and then essentially done the first part of what this question is, which is cataloged a bunch of different websites by a bunch of different characteristics and traits. And so we have literally a ranking list of, they're called ranking factors of the Google algorithm. And you would be shocked at how much qualitative work is necessary every single time. Similarly, with ChatGPT 4.0, we fully believe that the cost of creating good content is going to $0. Like, that is a reality in ours. It doesn't mean that all content is going to be AI generated. It also doesn't mean that all content is going to cost $0 to create. It just means, like, what does ChatGPT 10.0 look like? Probably pretty solid. So how does all of this interact with the world that we're moving into? I think at the end of the road is when all of those things, which is probably a decade away, come into their future version, and AI can do them to the extent that a human can do them today. We're not searching for information on the internet the way that we are today. We're much closer to thinking in our heads that we want something without having a chip implanted in it and having the answer kind of come right to us. So I think that the answer is, in that world that you described, SEOs won't really add a lot of value. And that world that you described, based on where we are today, is so many orders of magnitude iteratively away from where we are today, that how we access information as human beings should fundamentally change at various points on that road also.
Cool. That's awesome. It's I know it's a deep question really to start off with, but and somewhat is kind of fundamental in, like, how are humans adding value to this, like, mainly kind of big computer equation and problem. But I appreciate where you're coming from on the answer, and yeah, I do see a future that is, like, obviously if we're in the sort of very early stages of this technology, if that's part of the technology that's being leveraged later, then certainly search is going to probably look different too. It definitely looks different than it did 10 years ago, or at least Google's willing to smash a lot more things into at least the feed that we see right now.
I think so. And I think there's going to be an era of what we would call today SEO or AI optimization, where the future is you are optimizing for GPT models that you've never seen and you will never see. And so how do you make sure that your stuff becomes the de facto response when it's easy for somebody not only to click a button and create a good piece of content, but to create a GPT model that
Mhm.
gives you answers to questions? So I think that's where a lot of this stuff is going. And where I see the industry evolving towards is, like, the big thing for us is what we call the human era of SEO and of search and of information retrieval. And that's like when there's so much content on the internet, when AI is able to be an amazing, fantastic catalog of information as well as basically encyclopedia. What do we as a species gravitate towards? Well, number one, we should gravitate towards that in terms of when we want info, we should go to the place that gives us the info. And the other way that we're going to turn as a species, my prediction, I don't think it's like a particularly crazy prediction, is really leaning into the humanizing elements of us as individuals, our experience, our expertise, our authenticity as beings. It becomes more and more important.
Cool. Wow. I could imagine a whole nother episode with questions just down that path. But in order to keep down the path that I've got, I'll move on to the next question. And it's basically, in all the algorithm updates, and this is more like, much more SEO centric, but like in all the algorithm updates that you've seen over your career, in SEO, and personally, I feel like, recently they've been drawing less and less attention. I feel like in years past, every corporate, person was like, oh, well, and it's this update that's coming up, and you're like, yeah, okay. I'm glad you know the term, and maybe you saw that in SEJ or something, or anyway. So I feel like they're drawing less and less attention, but regardless, do you feel like core tactics are changing, or are we just getting new things, as SEOs, quote unquote, to worry about?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that basically things layer on top of each other. So algorithm updates are just the bar getting higher and higher. And when people think that they get penalized by algorithm updates, but the overwhelming majority of the time, what's actually happening is they were just kind of right at the line of what is acceptable and what you'll get credit for. And then the bar raises and you stop getting credit and you stop getting, recognition for that. So we think that something bad happened, but actually it was just mediocrity that then became like unacceptable. So we've seen that most recently in the most recent algorithm updates with helpfulness, with like the content helpfulness, and when Google's talked about EEAT, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, experience. And essentially, like that's the bar rising and rising. I think that for a lot of people, SEO, as it becomes more mature, as every industry does, it becomes more top heavy, and there are fewer winners who win more. Google wants to trust fewer websites over time because they want to be more certain about the answers that they are providing. So it's a risk to have new sources of information, unproven through years and years of click-through rate data, unproven through years and years of good technical experiences on their website. Google wants to give you the certainty so that people go and use the ad platform. And so what that creates is a system where there's fewer larger winners. And so I think one of the things where there's less of an echo of this and that is because it's gotten harder to win on average and there's less to go around for mediocre performance. Now you have a lot of companies who are just kind of abandoning their efforts in this channel. And it's even a recommendation that we make to folks where it's like, if you're pretty far away, this might be a hill you don't want to walk up.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as you kind of end up sweeping out, some of the, people that aren't doing so well, and getting them out of the fray, is it just a harder game to play? And you see that, and the only unfortunate side effect of that, does that only mean that it's the biggest players that are able to play the game? It's
I
only
think
an all-star game.
that's a great question. I mean, if you're we have an agency arm, and we've taken multiple clients from, I don't know, domain rating, domain authority. If people are familiar with the logarithmic from 1 to 100 scale that dictates website authority, we've taken people from 2s and 1s and 10s to 50s and 60s and 70s. And that is not an overnight process. And that's something that, like, I don't know a whole heck of a lot of agencies that are able to do that in a repeatable fashion. So I think you have, for a lot of people, when they're looking at their competition and you're a DR or DA 40 and everybody else is in the 70s and you're trying to optimize keywords on a page, like that's not going to get the job done, essentially.
Definitely. Cool. Well, you were leading right into the next question really, really well. So I appreciate that. So let's say you equated the few thousand ranking factors, to like levers to pull and push. Do certain ones stand out as having a larger impact than others, or is it really you need to be pushing a majority of those and pulling them, basically working those items in order to get ahead, or are there ones that like, hey, if you get enough backlinks, you'll win.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Everything is, there's really the four corners of SEO and of search. Website authority / backlinks is one of them. On-site optimization is another one. That's the one that's actually becoming less and less weighted right now. Content is another one, and that went from do we have the page to how helpful is the page. I think that's really the core metric to look at now. And then the last one is technical, which will always be there. Just your website taking a long time to load. So in our experience, it's all zero sum. So it's all really about what the rest of the players in your space are doing. And that's why the number one deficit that we see is on website authority, because you have a lot of teams who are focused on cleaning up the technical components of their website, or you have a content oriented team and you tend to lack in that one area because, like, okay, go tell any SEO to optimize a page, they can do it. Go tell any content creator to create a piece of content, they could do it. Go tell anyone on an SEO or a content team to go build 500 high quality links, which is not going to happen. So that's where we see the largest gap there. In terms of right now, my advice, what we saw in the latest algorithm update was we saw relevancy factors, which we just define as the combination of keywords, which are the words you put into a search, plus whatever's in bold, the match words in the description, in the meta description on the Google search results page. Keywords, LSIs, latent semantic indexing, which is just the common language used in the top 100 search results. And then the third one is entities, which are just officially recognized subtopics. There are things when you put them into Google, there's a knowledge graph. When you put them into Google Trends, it's a topic as opposed to a search query. And so those are kind of like that. The bucket of those three things are known as relevancy. And that has historically been one of the methods to getting really good marks for optimizations. The latest Google algorithm update, we have never seen ever before so many relevancy factors stop correlating with positive rankings. Mm-hmm. Which basically means one of two things. Either number one, everybody is doing it at that point. So that's with schema, that's a good example. Everyone is doing schema where it's no longer a ranking factor that correlates, because if you have it, you don't get better rankings because everybody else gets it. So if you don't do it, you're in trouble. But if you do it, again, you're just above the bar. The relevancy stuff, we saw that being replaced with helpfulness. And helpfulness is wild, wild west right now, because it's basically an algorithm made by Google. I don't know if they're internally still calling it BARD or if it's like a precursor to Gemini. It's not making images and stuff like that, but it's an AI synthesis where it's looking to define the word helpful, and Google has a definition of it. You can go look it up. But essentially what it means is adding value to what you're talking about through expertise, experience, authenticity, and trustworthiness. And we saw that those sorts of metrics really gained a lot of ground. And so some rules of thumb that I would say would be, when you're writing value per word, what does that mean? Well, you still need to get to 1,500 words if that's what everybody else is doing, but that you can't have fluff. So now you have to provide all the subtopics and all the information therein. If you're making video, value per second would be another metric that you could use. So I think, so in one corner, you're like links and domain authority and domain rating. And then in another corner, I'd say helpfulness in terms of content, authorship profiles. Answer the question right on the very first thing of the page. Here's the article. Here's the answer to the question. The rest is context. And so I, as a reader, I should be able to skim through your article and I should be able to see all the things that are in there while scrolling on my phone. It's called the scrollability test. And then if something's interesting to me, I'll stop and then I'll read that section. And that's the mentality that you want to be able to provide when you're creating content. Mm-hmm. And do so through a human lens. So the example that we always give is, I go to the pharmacy and I have a prescription. I ask the pharmacist to fill the prescription. The pharmacist says, sure, I'll totally do it, but there's a generic version available. It's 10% of the cost. You should just do that. That's the pharmacist using their expertise to make a recommendation to me. If I go back to the pharmacist, I say, hey, can you fill this prescription? They say, I can. But every time I do that for someone, it doesn't work. They come back, I recommend this other thing. You should just do that. That's the pharmacist using their experience. And so you could look at that scenario and say, well, if I haven't been a pharmacist, I wouldn't know how to do those things. So how could I put that into my content? And my argument would be you shouldn't be writing about that topic.
If you don't have the expertise or the experience, then
yeah. How can you be helpful in an era, Brent, where literally this machine can catalog information and aggregate information better than every single human being? If you're just replicating that, how can you be better than that? You literally cannot be. And so you have a lot of people right now being like, oh, what about my top of funnel content? What about my content? Like, that is not where you have a competitive advantage as a human. You still also, as a business, understand the customer journey, the client journey, but SEO is evolving. SEO has learned the hardest lessons around providing value, because most companies, you're able to kind of skirt the rules. But in SEO, you actually get smacked down twice a year if you are towing the line of providing value versus some sort of a loophole. And you have a lot of people in SEO who've been around for a long time. They actually have very high standards because they know that if not, then they're just on the chopping block 6 to 18 months later. Mm-hmm. And so where I see actually the field of SEO going is moving and evolving into the next era of brand equity. And it's basically like, what makes one company more valuable than another one? And while also in an era of AI. And how do you decommoditize as a company, which is like the holy grail, because that's how you boost your margins significantly. And the answer is, you actually provide the most value. You actually meet the customer where they need to be met. You actually are authentic in how you speak and what you care about. It's not a sales trick or a marketing trick. That's actually how you think. That can't be faked. And therefore, it can also always be felt when it's real. And that is going to be the marker of what makes a successful versus a unsuccessful company in an era where we can push buttons and create things at scale that we otherwise previously couldn't. That's no longer impressive. What becomes more impressive is how I feel when I'm interacting with your brand and the value that you've generated for me without asking me for $1. And that's why we're talking about the human era that we're going to move into and all that sort of stuff. But it's so obvious to us, that's what's next.
Yeah, cool. I know that we kind of touched on this just a little bit, but I'm very curious as to, if anybody could maybe move the needle, or you guys, at Search Hides are able to move the needle in a repeatable way, from, some low DA to high DA and that, that helps, move the marker. Is there any space that is too crowded, that you feel like is like, oh, wow, I just wouldn't play in that ballpark, and some things that come to, mind are like, oh man, mattresses. But you watch somebody like, oh, Purple, or like, this other mattress brand, and they come out and explode, and there's enough, sort of recognition, maybe media coverage and all this stuff that catapults them. But is there anything that you feel like, oh man, I wouldn't play in that ballpark, it's just too tough?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. But there is no ball. We play in all the hardest ballparks. That's like, I don't know why, but we're just like, hey guys, this field looks fun, and we're like, really? Are you sure? It's literally just lava. And we're like, no, it's cool. We'll just build stuff on top of it. We'll go across. It'll be fine. But no, but in the most competitive spaces, it's not just about your ability to create a powerful website with a lot of good links, with a lot of content. Your brand search volume matters. Your multi-traffic channels matter, because you're being analyzed, and your reviews globally matter. Your syndication coverage, your media coverage matters. Your online footprint from third-party websites matter. Your customer support matters. Like, all of these things actually dictate your threshold for success with SEO. So if we don't have those things, we can only take you so far. If you have those things, we can make you a winner every single time. And I think that's really the difference, where it's like, you can't just, 5 years ago, you could be like, roll up your sleeves. And it's just, you know what, we're just going to do enough of this stuff for enough times. And now there's so many factors that you need to have that if you're missing some core pieces of the puzzle, again, it's zero sum. So if everybody else in the space has them, then you're competitively disadvantaged.
Yeah. Yeah. And I assume that's how you kind of look at a client up front, is just understanding, like, what leverage do you have? If they do have this like amazing customer service, system, and these great reviews and this great media coverage, that, at the end of the day becomes leverage to a certain degree. And then, like, if they don't have all those elements and they're playing in a ballpark where everybody else does, they aren't able to meet that minimum, quote unquote. Therefore, like, just digging in and doing some of the basics, as you were saying before, isn't going to get you to the same place that all those other people are going to be.
Yeah, I think like the easiest way to just create a single metric that encompasses all of that is brand search. If you have a sufficient amount of brand search, that means you're doing enough advertising. That means you're in different channels. That means people are hearing about you in different capacities. People are associating you with a certain industry. So if you have like some average amount of brand search, then yeah, all of a sudden the rest of that stuff can get taken care of. And in terms of search, that can take you incredibly far.
Yeah, cool. Wow, I pulled up somebody in SEMrush the other day that had 93% of their keywords were branded, but they didn't have much organic ranking on everything else. And I'm like, oh well, at least their brand is doing well theoretically, but they've got a lot of sort of track to make up. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I guess, the next question is really just about Google in general. And I know that, Google keeps squishing the organic rankings lower and lower and lower. We've seen it for years and years and years. But where does now the value of organic stand against ads, shopping, map? And I mean, like, theoretically, you want everybody to be in all of those places. But, like, if you were going to juxtapose, organic versus those other, sort of avenues, where do you rank it?
It's a good question. I think that a lot of different industries, paid ads are going on Google are going to be way better than organic. And a good example is anything e-commerce, where you're basically going to, like, what are you trying to do for an e-commerce website for SEO? Are you ranking categories? Are you ranking specific names of products? Like, what's the search volume on that? Probably not that high. Versus anybody who's shopping for any sort of top on the internet sees an advertisement for Google Shopping for you. So there's these inherent things that like don't have the exact translations organically to what you're looking to do, where something like paid advertising makes a lot of sense for you. On the flip side, you have things where a consumer is really looking for some level of commercial intent. And as we evolve as consumers more and more, what we become more and more sophisticated in understanding of is, and therefore less like prone to it, is advertising, where it's like the ads have always been there. Google Shopping, I think, e-commerce for SEO, I think it's important. I think that there's a lot of channels that should come first for a brand compared to organic. And also, so I think that Google has slid in to fix a lot of these natural gaps. And if you look at them with, this thing used to be like this and now it's not like this, when in reality, it's like, does it actually work better in this way that it is now? Same thing with maps. Like, if you're doing local search, it totally makes sense for there to be a big map that shows your location, because that should be one of the top factors in dictating what you are and where you go. It just requires us to evolve our skill sets, which is another thing that Google has done. Like, one day map showed up, and then one day rich snippets showed up, and then you could get position 0 and position 1. That was a wild time. And then people also ask questions showed up one day. And then this thing called SGE showed up one day. And it's all just the latest version of what Google always does, which is kind of trying to keep people on the website and trying to create more precise answers to a person's queries. And so I don't see them as, for example, like SGE is probably the biggest opportunity that we see as a company in the last like 5 years, because all of a sudden you can cut the line on everything. Now, if you're looking at it from the opposite perspective, which is these search results are invading my potential rankings, like you're kind of going against the trend. So how can you actually look the other way and say, how do I take advantage of this? Our literal most successful campaigns ever have come from these sorts of changes in Google, where it's like, okay, cool. Whoever figures this stuff out earlier gets a massive advantage across the board for everybody. And so I'd encourage people to take a look at it from that perspective. So that's kind of like how I see these evolutions over time. And I think that it's going to evolve into the next version too, which is people are going to keep searching more and more on voice. People are going to search more and more through different mediums. And we talked at the beginning about like optimizing for GPTs that you've never seen and never will see, but still optimizing for that. Those things will happen more and more. And so I think the big, how do you react is, number one, like you understand what is coming. Number two, you're grounded in what is. So for us, Brent, our job is to look out as far out into the future as we can and be like, this is the thing that's eventually here. But my mom still uses MapQuest when she wants to look up directions someplace. So we lose the sight of what, quote, everybody else does in the world and what their behaviors are. 95% of people will keep with their exact same habits for an amount that would seem absolutely unthinkably long to you and I. And so, but the echo chamber of social media and the internet tell us something else. I think SGE is a good one. SGE, everything, it's coming everywhere. You have to have Google Labs to get SGE, and less than 1% of people have Google Labs. And then you have to have this setting enabled inside of Google Ads. And if you were to look on a social media website, you would think that only 1% of people are not getting SGE as their search engine. So it's just like what we think is happening and when it will actually happen, and what's all the stuff in between. We're at literally level 1 of these massive, massive changes, and there's 100 levels. And we have people thinking that we're on level 99 and we're about to step into the end game. I don't know. I can rant on a little bit about this or not, but
no, it's cool. I mean, like, part of it I feel like is necessary, because it is kind of like that rant where we don't know where it's going. You want to stay ahead of the curve, and like, but you also don't want to prognosticate, these changes are, at our doorstep right now when they're really not. And I mean, in one thing that's part of like talking about this kind of like legacy usage of like, all these like different tools like your mom and MapQuest, is that, these things get rolled out so slowly for a very particular reason. And it is because like people are curmudgeons too. They get very set in their ways, used to doing things that they do. And when things change, they know that that's disruptive to user experience. Now, granted, at the end of the day, they're doing that for their own business practices. Google, they're doing that for very particular reasons and to augment, the capabilities of their own search engine. But it's very interesting to, kind of take it one step at a time, as opposed to be like, oh my God, oh no,
Yeah, we look at this as a triangle, and on the bottom you have the foundational layers of everything search and SEO. And then you have the layer of where we are today. We call it the influence era, and this is like the EEAT era. And then tomorrow we have the human layer. But you can also, like, that's a framework for what do I do? So now what do I do? Okay, there's stuff coming at the top of the triangle. Do we abandon the bottom of the triangle? No, we don't. We stack on top. So what do we need to do? We need to do the exact same stuff. That's the same fundamental actions around good SEO. And also, we need to prepare for a world in which eventually everything is on SGE. So if you're an SEO and you haven't spent a lot of time Googling stuff to see what sort of stuff comes up, or they're reading articles about SGE and trying to better understand that, you're kind of putting your head in the sand.
Yeah.
If you're an SEO and you're thinking that people aren't going to be searching on different GPT models now or in the future to get answers to their queries, and how do GPT models, quote unquote, learn? They will tell you that they don't learn, but don't trust them. They know what they're doing. But no, kidding aside, like, how does that ingest data? How does it search for more information itself? Because anytime you ask ChatGPT a question it doesn't know, what does it do? It goes online and searches for the answer. So how does that work? And also it uses user feedback. So like those are models of tomorrow that we need to be prepared for. And at the same time, we cannot abandon the models of today, because that's how these things are literally made. Google has been an algorithm since it existed. GPT models are more algorithms. It's still human beings plugging instructions into a computer to try to get a result. And when it gives the wrong result, plugging in new instructions into a computer to try to get the right result. That is going to exist until we have literal AGI. And then, Brent, I cannot make any assumptions or declarative statements about what that world will look like. But it's fundamentally different than this one. And there are rules to this one. And if you compose yourself and you don't forget where you've come from, and you also understand where you need to move towards, now you can start taking action how to do that.
Yeah. Just breathe and take it all in, know what's going to happen. But just, I appreciate that note to every SEO. Just compose yourself. Chill.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, how can you be the best? This
Mhm.
is the way that capitalism works. Is you have this thing called an unsaturated industry, which, Facebook ads when it first came out, Google when you used to be able to put white text at the bottom of a page, whatever you want to call it. And so that creates excess profits. It's quote unquote easy money. And then you have more people come in because more people see easy money. And now competition rises, the industry expands. But what you get is this cycle of fewer winners on the top and more individuals below fighting over now a smaller pool overall. This doesn't just exist in SEO, but we know it to be true because there's the top of the search results. It exists in all businesses. This is why acquisitions and mergers are so big, because you can hit economies of scale and blah, 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 all this stuff. But ultimately, like, that's a philosophy that people should be taking with their life. If they are not taking actions to get into the top echelon of what they are working towards, you are on a slide going the other way. And by the way, that's totally 100% fine. It's like 100% fine.
Slides are fun.
Yeah, I love slides personally. I have like a nephew now who's a few years old, so I've completely rekindled my relationship with slides. So that's cool, but just know you're going for a ride.
Mhm.
And then, like, if you don't want to do that, which is totally your prerogative also, then you have to climb.
Mhm.
And you have to always be looking upwards and outwards on what that should look like for you.
Absolutely. I'm really holding it back, trying to not cite Miley Cyrus. It's the climb,
Why would you ever not? Why would you hold that back?
Why would I hold that back? You're right.
Let it out.
Along the lines, I guess, of, like where people are kind of like putting their prioritizing things for themselves, and whether that be, SEOs or like, actually just companies, when it comes to ads or search, are there things that you see people put really high on the list that they start attacking first that maybe should be much lower? They're getting ahead of themselves, or they're prioritizing the wrong thing.
Ooh, good question. So I'm going to answer this in like 3 or 4 different segments. Number one is inside of SEO itself. If all of your competitors have fundamentally stronger websites than you and you're sitting there optimizing keywords, that should be much lower on your list. your website authority should be much higher on your list. So that's within SEO. Then, just in terms of thinking about things from a channel capacity, we kind of talked about it before. There's industries that I think are much better for certain advertising channels and much better for organic channels. And if you're a company where you have like an impulse purchase type product, that's like a $20, $30 thing. I didn't know that this existed, but now that Instagram is doing me the pleasure of informing me of its existence, I should own it in the next 60 seconds. That's like paid advertising 101. That is not a good structure for search. That's called being pre-solution aware. Whereas like insurance, whatever, I know I need this thing and I just need to figure out the best one for me. That's always going to be better for search. In terms of ads, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say people are going to realize that doing brand search for Google is either less helpful than we thought it was or potentially more harmful than actually helpful, because it's basically going to brand search for like Google ads, by the way. I don't know if I made that clear or not, but okay. If you are paying for branded queries on Google ads, you run the risk of cannibalizing your CTR rates for your branded search. And that creates big problems because on average, branded CTRs are like 70, 80%. And if yours just start dipping a lot, then it looks like you're not the answer that you are being seen as for your own branded query. So
I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in on that one, but actually it kills me when there's no competition for a brand or a very particular name that's like a very distinct term, and you see people paying for ads. I'm like, well, okay,
So yeah, 100% agree. And I think it's even, and you're being very nice and you're being very neutral in how you're describing it. So I'll just say the one that is harmful.
Thank you.
It's not about the money. It's not about the cost per click. Like that is literally harming your brand score and there's no upside. And I think that's the big one that's kind of like, the thing that paid ad people don't talk about. They're like, oh, look at all these conversions that we're getting. And you're like, really? Well, like, show me your non-branded conversions versus your branded conversions. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is going to be another shoe to fall, because advertisers are, realizing, hey, you're saying I'm getting all these new conversions, but my revenue isn't fundamentally changing. Why is that? So yeah, I think those are misalignments in terms of prioritization that I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the only place where I'm like, justifying that is like if you have a really common term and that is your only way to break out of that, sort of like that noise is to have a branded search. And that's the only way that I would tell people to justify it. But even then I feel like, you should be doing other things alongside of it to like, boost the organic relevance of your own brand for whatever, that is. But yeah, I appreciate you just drawing a more definitive and firm line on that, saying it's harmful and people should stop doing that where they don't need to. On the next one, this one is that, like, I know you guys are creating some pretty impressive strategy and goes into like massive campaigns, and you guys have a ton of data points that you either, that you understand about, the algorithm, that you understand about, like your, the things that you need to do in order to make something successful. But, and actually where this comes from, where this question comes from is like, where does this like, this data, sort of like, analysis, stop and going into some human intuition? And it's funny, like, and I'm going to put this like aside here, is that like, like people creating those like big, notorious like Super Bowl campaigns, some of that wasn't based on, I know that, my customers are going to respond to the Budweiser frog. That was literally
Right.
like a creative's like, sweet, this looks funny and I think it'll be great, and it just happens to be gangbusters. But that there has to be some division there, for you guys as well. All the data points that need to be worked, but where's that human intuition kick in?
Great question. It's a great question. It's right around 50-50. So you can get the data, and then we literally can give the same data that we have access to all of our competitors, because it doesn't matter. At the same time, you can take somebody who is fantastic at synthesizing Search Console and GA and stuff like that, and they're toast if they're not using the same sort of data set that we are. So it's right around 50-50. And the reason why that's the case is because you see things in data that you then need to form a hypothesis about, and then you also then need to create real tests. And I'm not talking about, did we increase the font size of this by this, and did that do this, which I think is like such a bogus cop out. We in late Q4 2022, we started seeing the tricklings of the helpfulness content stuff come into the data. So we're starting to see things around trustworthiness matter more. We're starting to see things around expertise matter more. And yeah, you're not necessarily going to see that unless you have access to the data. But now what? What do you do? So we, in January of 2023, which if you're keeping scores, right around 7 months before the term content helpfulness existed on the internet. So we were calling it A+ content because there's no word for it. So we're like, here's a 30-page guide on how to create search types A+ content. And we're just making it up as we're going along because there's no resource on the internet for it. But we see this stuff is changing and we're like, okay, let's do it. And it's a brutal process because then we're giving clients version 1 at least on the agency side, we're giving clients version 1 of something. It's brutal for them to do it. It's brutal for us to make, and then we iterate back and forth. So it really creates and by the way, none of that's based on data. It just goes back and forth exclusively. It's like data, then qualitative, quantitative, qualitative. Let's see what happens. Oh, this is taking you 4 hours to do. Even if this is the best playbook in the world, that's not feasible. We have to go and turn this into something that will take you 30 minutes. And then after that, 10 minutes. And so much of what we're doing is that refinement process that it's always going to be collaborative. And the data is going to help give us both a starting point and then also a measurement point midway through.
Cool. Awesome. This one is more along the lines of Bard and AI and the future of Google, but where do you see that? You gave a few kind of future predictions, or the idea of what the tone and tenor of search may be in the future, the evolution of it. But yeah, what's your sort of general prediction about Bard and the convergence of AI and search on Google?
I think the best way to have frameworks for thinking about these sorts of things is to break off everything except for the most fundamental layer. And the most fundamental layer that we're talking about is knowledge acquisition. Ultimately, this is a human being who knows X and they want to know Y. And it could be information about a topic. It could be information about a product. It could be purchasing a product. It could be killing time, whatever. Well, that's a bad example. First three were good examples. So that's the most foundational layer. And now what you're getting at is how does that progress over time? It's the same example of horse and buggy, car, train, airplane, rocket ship. It's all how to move from A to B. All of it, how to move from A to B. But it looks so radically different. If you're looking at them in isolation, you're like, these things are crazy. And you're like, these are just manifestations, different manifestations of the exact same thing. And so if you zoom out and you go, well, what does knowledge acquisition look like? And how does that evolve over time? Then I think that gives you hints of where things are going. And so what you're seeing is different in input. I want to be able to say, I want to be able to type, I want to be able to click with a TV monitor, I want to be able to blink with my Apple Pros. I want to be able to think without having a chip inside of my head, unless I'm into that sort of thing, whatever. And then get a response back. Where does the response come from? Like, seriously, what gives the response? What is the indexation of information? What is the data set that generates a response? Like, that's where human history is moving towards. It's like, it's the internet. And what Google did was they had the first real worldwide indexer of information. And that's where, and we're moving towards the next versions of that. So my predictions are it's going to be really fragmented, because it's going to be like, well, here's my indexation for travel. Here's my indexation for fashion. Here's for weather. Here's for this thing. And then guess what's going to happen? Then we're going to have aggregator services for them, because then it's going to get too fragmented. And then what's going to happen? Then it's going to look a heck of a lot like it does today, because my prediction is that everything is cyclical and we simply bundle and unbundle indefinitely over time. And in doing so, we refine each step of the process each time. So the future, I promise you, there will be, if it's Google or if it's another Google, there will be, again, a single source of information for every single thing on the internet. And in between, we will go pretty far into the other direction, which is like there will be many sources of very specific information on the internet, as well as how we do that. So in the future, it's like the near future, it's we got to use this thing if we want to use voice. We got to use this thing if we want to use image. So we're unbundling how we're searching. And then it'll go back to being a single bundle, like, oh, do that all over here, but only for this topic, then do that all. So it's going to ebb and flow. But I think that, like, ultimately, how can you be an accelerant of the cataloging of that information and of humanity? That's essentially like what search engines and GPT models are spitting out. So like, how can you be the one who catalogs? And if you're taking that mentality, how you go about doing stuff changes pretty dramatically compared to like optimizing keywords. But then at the same time, like, the things that we've been able to manipulate on ChatGPT are laughable. So, and Google with helpfulness, like, it's an AI that is great at doing like 5 things and it's terrible at lots of other things. So if you put into your article, if you're very tongue in cheek and you're like, look, I'm not an expert, I'm just a hobbyist, I like doing this. We've watched articles tank that say that, because this thing is like, oh, that's not expertise. So it's still very, very basic. And if you understand how these models work, then you understand how to play into them, and you understand the direction that they're going, and you understand essentially like what all of these indexers are actually looking for.
What it's trying to achieve. Cool. Yeah. All right. That's awesome. And then finally, here at the end, how about some optimistic feelings about the industry, whether that be, of SEO in general, and why should everybody feel good about it? I think there was something in your last statement that I feel good about, of just like, it's people seeking knowledge. And I feel like, that we're at a point in history where we have access to so much, and we should be grateful and thankful of that. And theoretically, all of these algorithms, yes, you could have the doom and gloom, look at it of like, they're all to like sell us more products and, work towards just, capitalism. And anyway, but you could also look at the other side, that like it's filling us full of like knowledge that we might not have had before. I have learned countless things from the internet, how to do my job, and I feel like it's pretty incredible when you look at it like that. But do you have any other kind of big, bright spots of like, this is people, speak ill of this technology sometimes? What are some things to look forward to?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that technology is pretty neutral, the same way that like in my perspective, money is neutral. It's not inherently good or bad. It's more about how it's being used, by whom it's being used, and in what capacity. So I'm going to give you 4 layers of optimism, but really 4 layers of insight. They're my genuine insight.
Cool.
So number 1 is, hey, the search results are changing a lot. There's a lot of SGE in there, and 80% plus of SGE results are not from the first page of Google. This is crazy. This is a crazy, amazing opportunity to cut the line across the board if you just spend some time thinking about how these things work and interacting with how they work. You literally can cut the line in a way that you have not been able to do for years and years and years. Like, the time is now to make the largest website traffic compared to what you could imagine. It's not going to be here forever. The time is now. That's layer 1. Layer 2 is, hey, there's not just Google anymore. What's going to happen? Google 199%, whatever. Caveat number 1, again, 95% of people are going to stick with their current habits for an incomprehensibly long time. Everything around us is an echo chamber designed to make us feel otherwise. However, you now have an opportunity to get out in front of this reality of, hey, there are going to be additional ways to retrieve information online. How can I help people, companies, clients get met there proactively? If you're an SEO and you haven't figured out how to manipulate ChatGPT, are you really an SEO? Like, are you really taking that mentality? Because you should be. And it's like, to me, it's obvious that you should be. But now, like, think of the abundant mindset that you could have versus like, oh, my world's getting smaller. Your world's getting bigger because now more and more people care about you and what you can do than they did 3 years ago. So that's layer 2. Layer 3 is the evolution of SEO. And that kind of like, GPT models and goes on top of that, which is like, today it's SEO, tomorrow it's AIO, and in the future it's brand equity. And that's like the ethos at what is at the core of companies. And you can lead that charge. You're coming from a position of experience and expertise. Gee, I wonder what that's from. But you're coming from those areas, and you are in a position where you can understand these things better than other people because you've been molded by an ever increasing bar that has serious consequences for not hitting. So your world just got a whole heck of a lot bigger. And the 4th layer is the evolution of humanity. So AI tools right now, like, if you were to query humans, and you were like, hey, human beings as a species should be working more or less in general and over time, fill in the blank. No wrong answers. Everybody's going to say working less. And we now have technology that has brought about a potential opportunity for that to happen in a meaningful amount of ways globally. And of course, there are many, many things that need to be figured out and thought through, and potential pitfalls and obstacles and holes that we can fall into. But 10 years ago, that potential opportunity wasn't there, and now it is. So we have an opportunity as a species to evolve to a higher state of existence and living compared to what existed before. And I think like all of those things are true across all of those different layers, whether zoomed into how you're thinking about the search results to zoomed out in what does humanity look like because of this technology. And sure, SGE could destroy your business if you want to stick your head in the sand and never look at it. And also AI could create a more prosperous humanity. So we'll see which way it plays out. I got my votes in store, but I'm called an optimist by people, but I think it's grounded in history. Like we pretty much have a good history as people, as humans, of like figuring it out and working it out. And you could argue that we're aware of more problems than ever, but also globally, we have the highest standard of living as ever. Progress is just not a straight line up and to the right. It's got lots of ebbs and flows, this and that, and take 2 steps backwards and 3 steps forward and 17 steps backwards. And like, that's the normal evolution. But we're going in the direction that we're supposed to be going in. And that's what progress looks like. Imperfect, but present over time.
Dang. Couldn't have hit with a better nugget there at the end. That's really good. I really appreciate that. And honestly, I appreciate all, your answers and stuff. I hit you with a pretty deep existential one up front, and you just carried it right through to a great answer at the end. So thank you. And really, definitely, thanks for joining here. Anything you want to drop as far as ways to connect here at the end of the podcast?
Yeah. So searchtides.com, hub for all things SEO and AIO. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on LinkedIn at Searchtides. You can follow us on YouTube at Searchtides. If you want a friend request me on LinkedIn, Gregory Brooks on LinkedIn, partner at Searchtides. We as a company have been keeping an incomprehensible amount of things behind closed doors. We've decided maybe 4 or 6 months ago that was boring. And now we are opening the kimono to everybody. So there's no investment other than your time to come and hang out and learn about things that we've learned and hear about things that we think, and do everything from conquer the search results as we move into a SGE model that is actually less than 1% of 1% of all searches. But hey, who's counting? All the way to your ability to self-actualize as a human being. Come along for the ride.
A great invitation. Well, Greg, I got to say thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brent. Pleasure chatting. And Thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, this has been another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I am your host, Brent Feldman. We will be back soon with more content. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.